Live. Sir, I think we are live now.
Okay.
So it's time to start.
Okay. To all of you.
Yeah. So, dear participants, I welcome all of you to this unique webinar, a national webinar on leadership perspectives from history by Bijal Chhaya, who is the senior manager at Wipro Technologies, Bangalore. So I welcome you all to this webinar and the webinar series that we are doing on behalf of Department of Management Studies, Basaveshwar Engineering College, Bagalkot. I am Dr. Sanjay Hanji, HOD of the MBA department. I also welcome the coordinators of, firstly I would like to welcome the resource person, the speaker for today, Mr. Bijal Chhaya sir, who is the senior manager at Wipro Technologies. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, sir. And I also welcome the coordinators of today's the webinar, Dr. Rashmi Hunu and Professor Vaibhav Deshpande to this function, and also all the participants and all my faculty colleagues, students, and industry people and faculty members, people who have been linked with this webinar. I welcome you all. So, will not take much time. Now, I'd like to request Professor Vaibhav Deshpande to introduce the resource person, please.
Okay.
Vaibhav, you're on.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you're on.
All right, sir. Good afternoon, respected principal, HOD, faculty, and participants. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's national webinar resource person, Mr. Bijal Chhaya. Mr. Bijal is in civil engineering. Eight years of experience in several national brands industries. To name a few, Tata BP, Tata Motor, Taj Hotels, Tata Tea brand, JTM, since brought over by Airtel, and in advertising and marketing industries. Now, Bijal is serving the 20th year in Wipro Technologies and in learning and development space Wipro for 10 plus years. Currently, Bijal is serving as a senior manager, learning and development at Wipro Technologies, Bangalore. Also played several roles in different teams. To mention a few, group marketing of Wipro's India, set up and ran a tele-sales team, leadership hiring team, instrumental in setting up the entire ecosystem. His expertise in strategic thinking, innovation and creativity, leadership behavior, creating strong value propositions, building brands, building resilient culture using psychometric tools as spoken to coach leaders. With this brief introduction, I present Mr. Bijal Chhaya in front of you all. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Now I hand over this platform to Dr. Sanjay Hanji.
Thank you, Vaibhav.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sanjay, you're on mute again.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. So now I welcome again the resource person for today, and I request Bijal Chhaya sir to take the floor, and it's all open for you, sir, for the session to begin. So let me open the slides for you first. So you can just start, sir. I mean, till then I'll open the slides. Yeah.
Sure. So welcome everyone, and thanks for spending the time. The motivation to do this workshop is really to build awareness around how history shapes people's lives, and the idea is really to connect historical events to human behavior and build beds of possibilities into our modern era. So that's really what this is. Of course, the topic today, which is by means of the trigger of a conversation around the European colonization of the world journey, is an exploration into the possibilities that exist in human psychology, human behavior, etc. So if you can move to the next slide, Professor, which is around the agenda slide.
Are you able to see this slide, sir?
Yeah, so
Just one.
I can. Yes, I can. Okay, so just 1 minute. Yeah. Okay. So so the point here is at the deepest, human possibilities is about meaning making. We'll explore that to build the foundation, historical events, how they are meaningful for individuals, societies, etc. Look at European history around the 14th, 15th century AD. Critical event, which is really the capture of Jerusalem, happened, and by means of that, what was the challenge that manifested for European society? Them over a period of time responding to that the disruption that the Constantine capture of Constantinople by Ottomans, and how they responded to it, and all of that. Then the European colonization journey quickly making sense from a leadership lens. And finally, connecting that to an Indian example, something that I'm personally inspired by, which is the Arvind Eye Hospital story, which is at an abstract. The Arvind Eye Hospital story is very similar to behaviors that manifested in Europe a few centuries back. And finally, by means of all of that, what does it mean for us working professionals, students, faculty who shape human minds in terms of a philosophical orientation to those journeys into the 21st century and beyond for human society. We'll try and give some direction there. Okay, so I think that if you can move to the next slide, Professor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the slide is up. First point I want to talk about is, unlike the 20th century, which was about management, you didn't have too much of volatility post World War II, really, at least a industrial evolution of higher possibilities in terms of wealth creation, sharing of that wealth into modern societies. So then it was fairly stable. But the management guru, Peter Drucker, let's start with what he says, is that unlike the 20th century, which was about management, 21st century will be driven by leaders and great leadership. So it will emphasize the need and the premiumness of leadership in this era that we find. And if you think about COVID as an example, across the world, it has thrown up extreme situations, and across the board, we are searching for leaders in different strata of society to help us through that. What it really means is we have to dig deep. Digging deep is really tapping into our emotions, and that the emphasis is on the cognitive concept mastery. The leadership entails personal mastery by means of getting in touch with our and by means of that and their emotions, and building a common sense of direction, vision, etc., and helping groups survive and thrive. So that is actually driven, to my mind, largely emotionally. This also philosophically aligns with, while the third bullet point really talks about Western thought around Russian thinking, but actually, my oversight, as this slide came up, the thought really came as omission there. German thought, philosophical, because people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Heidegger, etc., drove a lot of writing in the 19th century, which emphasized the alignment of the opening up of human possibilities only when you're deeply in touch with your own emotional base, and that's where even in India, historically the emphasis on bhav and emotion in our language, in our culture, etc., is really a manifestation of that. When you operate from that deep level of bhav on a daily basis, on a regular bhavs, over a period of time, you build a certain courage, a sense of this is what I am, this is what I stand for, and I have the courage to stand and face the world on my terms in that sense. And that's important as individuals step into adulthood. That should pretty much be fairly strong, because it's that sense of courage and which provides the purpose to take on the challenges of life, and that's where the shaping of
Hello.
uh,
Sir, I mean, little bit, there is a disturbance in the voice. I mean,
anymore.
no, sir, I mean, still not so clear. Uh,
Four level.
Hello.
Professor, yeah, Professor, can you hear me?
Yeah. Now I'm able to hear you, sir. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, we are able to hear you, sir. We are able to hear you, sir.
Okay, so point to make. Yeah, okay, fair. So over what happens then is the sense of transparency, because you're standing on and having the courage to stand by what you believe, coded by the people that you interact with. And that sense of authenticity is good to have, because it is that trust, and it's important to build trust in human relationships, manifest when those deep bonds of trust exist and taken forward individually and in groups through powerful visions or sense of purpose that groups jointly work towards. Those journeys become deeply meaningful, and human society has tons and tons of inspirational stories that we look up to, respect across cultures around the world. And if you look at the deepest, it's about groups of human beings working together, finding meaning and purpose in the journeys that they're embarking on, and nurturing each other in those journeys. And therefore, the point I want to make, where I started, is the 21st century, therefore, is really about embarking on those journeys. If you can move to the next slide, Professor.
Sir, 1 second. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So just pause on the visual image right there. It's an abstraction of really a tree, and that tree is really roots seeking depth.
Okay. Okay.
Is that meaning making?
Yeah, sir. Hello. Sir, I mean, we are not able to hear you. Hello. Audience, just give us a second. There is a technical problem from the sir's end. So we're just sorting it out. Yeah.
Yeah, so Professor, here is what we'll do. Even if it means my image is not, face is not
No,
clear,
no problem.
let's stay with. Yeah, so because I think this is exactly what I thought was fearing that could
Yes.
happen, is that the Wi-Fi connection can crash at some point. Okay, so yeah, it's this is what.
No problem, sir.
You can
You
hear
can
me, right?
continue.
You can hear
Yeah.
me, right? Yeah. Okay, so it gets easier for me. So the point I was making is the human species sits at the apex of all other species on Earth, and that's because through our group interactions, we have. We've actually, in some sense, outsourced our survival and growth to the groups that we are part of, and then that group sort of protects us, and once we are trusted and part of the inner accepted and as intrinsic part of that group, those groups then interact with other groups, and by adding value to each other's groups over centuries, aided each other's survival and growth journeys, and that's where the manifestation economically, culturally, socially manifests in terms of the scale of domination that exists to some extent, even to the detriment of the planet today. So that's really where the innate capability of the human being to add value by being part of a group into other groups. Hello.
Yes, sir. You want me to
Yeah.
change the slide? Yeah.
No, don't change the slides.
Okay.
I'm not finished yet. So
Right.
this then now, if you build, you're creating value on an ongoing basis, which has a certain amount of stability. There is an under, and that's the cost because of the way the entire social structures are architected. Power is something that is always going to be there, and once power is experienced by the other, and some as facets of it don't go down well with the group that experiences, or even within the group that some people experience it, competition is bound to manifest between people and between groups, and that then becomes a powerful shaper of human destiny, and therefore history has and will continue to shape human context and so social context going forward. I just wanted to establish this by means of this slide, the connect between meaning making and human history. Some of these first two, three slides may seem a little heavy, but they're attempting to establish from a behavior lens the connect into history. And now if you can move to the next slide, where we'll go specifically into European history, and then probably that gets easier to digest. Yeah. Okay, so stepping now into the world of the 15th century, 1400s plus. At that time, there were multiple, kingdoms in Europe, and one large emerging empire in around the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, which was the Ottoman. And the map in the top right corner has a historical evolution of the footprint. And the map actually gapped, if you look at it closely, most parts of the Mediterranean Sea on which provided the trading routes between nations gradually began to be dominated by across the landmass into eastern and to some extent even central Europe, and on account of power, fundamental happened, and which was actually at a identities, deep religious identity, which is Christianity in and Islam, which anchored all of the Ottoman Empire. Um, Therefore, the rivalry for Constantinople led to eventually in 1453 Constantinople into the hands of the Ottoman Empire, and Ottoman, the what is called the Byzantine Kingdom, which was the Eastern Roman Empire, like 10, 15 citizens of that day and part of that empire, and fundamentally, what the Ottoman Empire did is that key trade route, or the city which controlled the trade, squeezed the spice trade which came from into and partly by sea and through the Arabian Sea, but landed up at Constantinople, and they in order to choke supplies, and this was by design with an attempt to create this in Europe, attempted to choke supplies, made supplies unavailable in all of Europe. This a big thing. If you can,
Sir, the voice
Professor, if you
is
can switch to the
breaking
next slide.
a little bit. Hello, sir. Hello. So the voice was breaking a little bit.
Next slide, please.
Yeah. So your voice is breaking a little bit. I mean, there is a network problem. I feel.
Okay, is it better?
Yeah. Now, yes.
Hello?
Hello. Yeah. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm speaking. Yeah. So you have the next slide up.
Yes.
So the point is that on account of that, there was a certain. The next slide really talks about the criticality of the spice trade. Spices were craved, and this is just suggest. For example, pepper that came from Kerala, largely, and Karnataka of modern day. Cinnamon, of course, cinnamon also came from India. Since Sri Lankan cinnamon historically has had a premium. Now, spices were critical not just for taste, which is the logical association we have in the modern era. We tend to associate spices with added flavor to food. While that is true, mentions of the were that they preserve food that through the extremes of winter in European where parts of northern Europe go to significantly minus temperatures and remain so for large. It is imperative for those societies wants and that was largely meat, things like pork, etc. Pork, lamb, even to slaughter them in salt and pepper, and so that this was available and those therefore these spices had a preservative role to play and were also seen herbal medicine at that time to be preventing disease. So those are in some sense beginning increasingly being revisited today. Given the absence of modern medicine, allopathic medicine that we have today, it was the only human society of treating disease, which is herbs, and so they had a lot of value in all. The Ottomans
Sir,
blocked
again,
this, and they also found support from amount of traders in Venice because there was money to be made. It wasn't break.
yeah, little bit, sir. Little bit again. There was problem. Yeah, it was clear for some time, and again it was breaking a little bit.
Yeah, Professor, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
I'm sorry about this, but anyway.
Yeah.
So therefore, Europe at a very deep level, because as the next slide will show, European society in the 13th and 14th century had already a lot. An added shock that the Ottomans imposed on them, survival level, and it was an existential challenge of Europe. If you can bring up the next slide.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah. The next slide is up, sir. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, the next.
Yeah. So the voice is breaking again. I mean, we are not able to hear you anything.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir. I mean, all this time, I mean, when I.
No. I'm saying if you can go to the next slide. Yeah,
Yes,
you
sir.
can go. Right.
Yeah, we are on the next slide, sir, now. I mean, the political context. Are you able to see the slide, sir, now?
Yeah, I can now see. Yeah, I can see the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so what happened is that the Islamic kingdoms had control of North Africa.
all the way up to Turkey. They were also, because of their military political might, they were able to listed across Europe and all of the world, was controlled on account of that now by the because they had 100% access to all the spices that came into that zone, and therefore the trading, etc., from Africa into, or from the Arabian or places like the Black Sea into Europe, was completely controlled them, and being able to set the terms. This became the in which everything operated. Uh, yeah. Also, Christian Europe, which was broken into multiple kingdoms, had found it struggle for many centuries to unite for multiple reasons. But it was two other factors had kicked in, because the country had seen Eastern Europe and Central Europe struggle with the Mongols invading them, and in the 14th century it was the plague which actually knocked off almost 100 million people, which is almost half the population of Europe. Very difficult for a sense of unity to manifest. So there was a sense of despair in that sense. Much that European kingdoms could do, take on the might of the Ottoman Empire. Next slide, please.
Yeah. Yes, sir. It is that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the also what came into play is that the economic challenges that manifested, which is the sheer challenge of achieving other workarounds, which is land awareness, or at least in passing conversations that there could be schools, but that required a certain amount of investing with deep financial pockets, what called venture capital funding today, which effectively, because Eastern and Central European powers were very financially challenged, it was only the Western European nations, and I'm really talking Spain and Portuguese, not so much the France and England's, but they were only those ruling families could possibly afford that. The point I also mentioned, that the Mongol invasion again had caused a lot of damage to European society in the 13th century. This got followed up like with the plague, and it again was a massive challenge, because think of it, half the population effectively died over that 80-100 year period. So it was massive. It would have disrupted society economically, socially, even politically, militarily, in every form, and the sense of self-belief would have been damaged. Sense of despair would probably have crept in. Then think of the technologies that existed, because the need at that time was ship routes that were, and Mediterranean is not a particularly deep sea, right? So therefore the technology, and winds are not extreme, so therefore the technology to traverse across ports in your Mediterranean, which was largely where the trading and the need for ships existed, was relatively simple. But these were not capable of deep ocean voyages, which was a different dimension altogether, that had to be created bottoms up. So it would require an enormous sustained effort on a longer term basis to momentum. Also, you need a map, right? If I want to get from point A to point B, I need a map. But the maps of that day and age effectively had no knowledge of how to get to places like Sri Lanka and other parts of the world by means of sea. And in many senses, it's not a tried proposition. I would rather stay averse. There was a sense of fear, aversion, etc., that crept in, and people tended to stay away. Yeah. So the next slide, please.
Yes. Yeah. Here it is. Yes.
So what happened then is, that's really it's worth pausing on this, which is that typically when there is an extreme crisis, there is very often a leader that emerges, and the leader that emerged for European society, and who's much forgotten, unfortunately. But at least from a historical standpoint, and as students, it's worth revisiting the persona of Henry the Navigator. Was the son of the King of John of the First of Portugal. Had strong military credentials, was deeply trusted and loved by King John, the King of Portugal, and by his wife, the Queen. And he had a track record of being able to achieve military successes off the coast of North Africa, because Portugal was trading and had a fairly strong naval history, because it's the far end of Europe. Unlike Spain, it doesn't have a very large land mass, and therefore its revenue, its income comes from and imports and exports and all of that. So therefore, it's no surprise that emerged there. And by over the 15th century, as this happened in the far furthest end of Mediterranean, the western end of the European civilization, which is Portugal, gradually began to experiment in incremental steps. And first marginal victories off the coast of North Africa, and it gradually started traversing the entire coast of West Africa, so that by 1445 the ships had begun to traverse the hump of West Africa. And that was very important, because suddenly there was a recognition that now there's a sense of a tipping point. You're going around a massive landmass, and as this momentum built the effort built momentum, in by about 50 years later, Vasco da Gama landed in Calicut in May 1914. It's interesting to note that da Gama came with three ships, went back only with one ship, because two ships were either left behind in India or lost, or whatever military defeats or whatever. But that one ship that sailed back to India and carried spices back from India into Europe had paid for that entire expedition 100 times. So what Vasco da Gama, investment was achieved, was put in 100 times that wealth went back in terms of spice, because they were able to circumvent the premiumness that the Ottomans imposed in terms of movement of spice. But that was a tipping point in terms of aha moment for the rest of European society. And there was, from that point, really no looking back. And if you can go to the next slide, please, Professor.
Yes. We are on the next slide.
And if this, I'm not really attempting to nor to have the depth enough to do adequate justice. Then the Portuguese were followed by the Spanish, and then between the Portuguese and Spanish, large parts of the New World, as it was called, divided by the Roman Catholic Church, but the French, the English, the Dutch, etc., who by the end of the 1490s and into the early 1500s, they were looking back, and gradually what happened, the deeper, bigger resources of not just Asia, but Christopher Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci found the North Americas and South Americas, and tons of gold started moving from different parts of the world, and silver, spices, and what commenced as trade became political conquest, and eventually by the end of the 19th century, almost the entire world was barring the continent probably of America, which was really the Americans and the Canadians. But other than that, the rest of the world was completely dominated by European civilization, and therefore the modern world. And honestly, if it hadn't been for World War I and World War II, we probably still have had the European colonization in the world into the 20th and the 21st. But that's a different conversation. But by the end of the 19th century, for example, the language and the legal formats and the culture that had crept into the entire world was European in its origin. And worth pausing on this, which is that it started 300-400 years prior, 500 years prior to that, with minuscule, small forays by Henry the Navigator, who was representing the European, challenge just to get spices, and see how much scale that journey built. And therefore the top right corner is really the picture of Buckingham Palace, which was, this picture is from 1700 something. But the of Britain, the wealth of France, the was really, and on account of this small forays that the Portuguese commenced, and everyone else in Europe eventually, fundamentally on account of rivalry between these kingdoms, joined the bandwagon. Because if one kingdom got too large, it became an existing challenge for the rest of the European kingdoms. So that dynamic played out, and that's where I will pause with the history dynamic. And if Professor, you can move to the next slide.
Yes.
Yeah, so
We are on the next.
quick 10, maybe 15 minutes in terms of the leadership lessons, at the heart, the human being, the leadership lessons, and is let's move on. Slide again, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that where I said group living, so our survival and growth is being outsourced to groups, and we therefore from a sheer survival compulsion are creating value for each other, and that's a human compulsion at a physical level and also a psychological level. Because here is the thing, that just as much as we need food to survive, also need the point I was making, meaning, days of work or things that we've achieved, etc., because that psychologically satisfies us. And this dynamic, and meaning and value creation are two sides of the same coin. Think of I started my career 27, 28 years back, so at least at a number level, I've probably experienced in some sense over a fairly long period of time. But if you go back to 1991, the IT industry, where it off in India, when PV Narasimha Rao opened up as Prime Minister, he opened up the Indian. Our IT exports from India that year, 91, 92 or thereabouts, was only $60 million. And trust me, large companies like Wipro, Infosys, TCS have many customers, which are today in excess of $60 million. And the entire, I don't know the latest NASSCOM figures, but clearly it is in excess and upwards. So from those humble journeys, the value creation journey for even the IT industry has covered a lot. And the point I make also earlier is that all value creation dynamics have a power dynamic, and the around that is as think of this, that initially there were just 2 or 3 companies, but today there are, even in India, there are hundreds of companies competing for that 150, $200 billion pie, right? Even within India. And then there are countries like Philippines, there are countries like Mexico, there are countries like Romania, Poland, etc. We are also wanting some percentage of that IT service industry that largely India as a country is dominant in. Universally true. Once a value creation dynamic manifests, there is going to be competition that kicks in, and on account of competition, rivalry, etc., kicks in. Is an opportunity for all of us to see where it and what are the levers to use in order to strengthen the value creation dynamic in the groups that we are part of, and that's philosophically the intent behind this slide, this presentation. Professor?
Yeah.
Now, this is, to my mind, the architecture, and this is worth thinking about, because most are too busy exploring what's to be done and how is it got to be done. A what statement or what set of activities is really working to a defined task, and the how is really the manner in which it's getting done. In conjunction, Greeks called it technos, and from that emerges technology today. But if that's primarily where our focus is, it is actually delivering around a defined ask, and in that dynamic, you are actually something that I'll come to a little later. Your individual sense of meaning making is operating, but is operating suboptimally, and there is an opportunity for that subjective self to have a larger play, to have a greater sense of self-belief and purpose, and in doing so have more ambition, see what else can be done, what way can I make this dynamic a little more favorable to me, etc., etc. And that's where the why and who, which is really the next slide, if Professor you can open up,
Yeah.
kick in.
Okay. It's there.
Yeah. So why is an explanation for on what and how that's experienced, or is going to be experienced. And the point around the why is there is no one why. There is always objective why, and it's deeply subjective, because as the English language says, one man's meat is another man's poison. And think of the that I love, which is drishti, and from there shrishti, and embedded in there is the ishta, a desire. So as your drishti, which as your vision, so is your shrishti. Therefore, it sets up the dynamic that if you have a drishti which is unique, a vision, as to use corporate parlance today, you where I'm saying there is always an opportunity to see a certain dynamic that, yeah, this serves ABC for me, but I dream bigger, I dream better, and can I go beyond this? And which is really what the Portuguese did around the Ottoman existential challenge around the spice trade. Appropriate word, and therefore that why and who in Greek society was called telos, from there with the word teleology, and that's means purpose, the Hindi word maksad, and maksad is deeply individual, and this is important to get, that the subjective sense of the person comes into play, and if you operate from maksad and purpose, the possibilities are far deeper than just operating from the what and how. Um, yeah, and if you operate from a maksad deeply, deep sense of purpose, there is a contrarian, creative possibility that opens up for you. Think of the rivalry that's happening even as we speak in Ladakh, India, China. It's at its core. It's two distinct cultures, two distinct societies attempting to shape a future for themselves on their terms, and that's what it's coming down to. And it's always going to be true of cultures and societies, and around the world. If you can move on to the next slide, please.
Yes.
And I'll pause there. So what I've really established is that operating from the why and the who, while it has short-term challenges and tons of issues to overcome, but a sense of purpose that motivates you and provides you meaning and purpose on the longer term, invariably sets up possibilities that otherwise would have never been available, and that's important to get. Quick story around that. Somebody I'm deeply inspired by is a person called Dr. Venkat Swami. I've had the privilege of meeting him many years back, two decades plus. I met him in Madurai Arvind Eye Hospital, and the story around him you can read through. But he started from a fairly humble background, worked in the Indian Army, in his late 30s or 30s or thereabouts. Much later became an ophthalmologist, retired as head of department of Madurai Medical College, which in that day and age was in itself a big thing. But he didn't stop there. In his late 50s, early 60s, he set up Arvind Eye Hospital by setting up something called the outreach program. And his motivation as an ophthalmologist, as an eye doctor, was those days you had a massive challenge in India because you had preventable blindness, which is people working in think of India of the 70s and all of that. If you have working in the fields day after day, month after month, year after year, in bright sunlight, then by the late 40s, early 50s, you cataract kicks in because of the sunshine on your eye, and then you tend to go blind and your productivity goes down. The family that you're part of, you are dependent on. That again is a cost that society is paying, and there are millions of Indians like that. And that dynamic was unacceptable to him. He took that challenge on and set up the first creative release to that, which is really an outreach program. So you take his team of doctors into villages in Tamil Nadu, in and around Madurai, screen them, bring them to the clinic and then the hospital in Madurai, etc. initially. And as word got out, more and more people joined that social cause, and eventually foreigners kicked in, so that he was able to provide world to poor villagers, people who would never have been able to afford it, and that. And on account of starting on that journey in the early 80s, or 20 odd years later, Arvind, if I remember the number correctly, was doing almost 200,000 surgeries. I don't know the number currently, but even 15, 20 years back was doing almost 200,000 surgeries every year as a group of hospitals, of which 60% were free. And that model had been replicated not just within affordability of cataract surgery is plummeted. The training and the skills that Indian doctors had became world class, so that surgeons from around the world, including from countries like the United States, gravitated to India to learn surgical skills from Indian doctors. And by means of this, this is really the rewards equivalent of Buckingham Palace kicking in by means of that journey that Dr. Venkateswamy embarked on, and therefore my message at a larger level is that it is a universal possibility, and it's opens up, operate from the why and who space on a sustained basis, the drishti, shrishti, and the ishta individually in terms of building a story of your own life, emotionally having the courage to play it out, taking the risks that life offers, and having an ecosystem that nurtures that. And therefore, into the last slide, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, and therefore, this Maslow, Herzberg, different hierarchies get used in terms of human motivation, etc. But the top end of it is really where, if you operate from the why and who, you can operate from the esteem needs, the self-actualization needs, and that's important to get. And the message then to students, as also faculty and working professionals, is this: think big. Trust yourself emotionally, have the courage to back yourself, and live up to full potential. Expect that yes, there will be challenges, but you are in it for the overhaul. And the more you operate from that lens, it builds a fulfilling, meaningful life at the end of the day. Because not only are you able to create value for yourself, psychologically it's deeply rewarding. Think of how happy or fulfilled somebody like Dr. Venkateswamy would have felt. And honestly, I know some of his stories personally. At age 87, 88, he used to start his day at 5 a.m. and finish at 11:30, reading up on medical literature in terms of how to improve various things in the hospitals that he led. Doctors from around the world were in touch with him. My message is this: that this is a human possibility, and education is really helping people getting in touch with their deep who they are and their sense of uniqueness. And just a quick comment on Wipro: a lot of the learning and development philosophically, even within Wipro, is attempting to, that I message, is attempting to get people to connect to this message at the core. That's pretty much what I had to say. At this juncture, I'll pause and take any questions if there are. Back to you, Dr. Sanjay.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful session, sir. Basically, we have some certain questions here, wonderfully explained by you, like how European colonization, what kind of problems they faced, and
Yes.
how did the Portuguese, took the leadership to build a way through the Mediterranean Sea, or way around the
Coast of Africa, then across the Indian Ocean to India, correct, by means of shipping.
And they were able to build up the trade links with the Southeast Asian countries.
Correct.
So that's
Correct.
the leadership what you talked, and also a very nice example of Dr. G. Venkateswamy, like how during the crisis, like how you opened the eye hospital and things. Now we have a couple of questions here. We have a question from Sona Alangan. So she asked, is there any substitute or neutralizer for leadership in this contemporary world?
Okay, so I need a little clarity. Substitute? No. So look, there. I mentioned that human beings have outsourced their survival needs to groups, and groups need leadership. So what you have to recognize is that leadership is really that you are taking charge of a team around you and helping them to move to higher possibilities, and for that to manifest. And the word I used, authenticity. You as a leader, if you are in touch with your emotions, your ability, there is a deep sense of who you are, and as you operate deeply from there, you are able to, as you deal with others, because others are emotions, driven by their emotions too, are able to relate to them very, very clearly. And because you are manifesting behaviors that set you up as trustworthy, and
Yes.
you then are looked up to, respected, the values that you demonstrate in your day-to-day life, people look up to, and that's a virtuous circle that you set up. The things that you need to do is, as a leader, watch for two dimensions. And this is something that if those interested, there's a Dr. Robert Hogan, who I've certified in, and has written extensively about that. Make sure that in your behavior there is a certain amount of predictability.
Okay.
That you stand for what you do, and you operate from deep sense of values, so they're predictable, and relationships around you are rewarding to others. You cannot be
Yes.
hogging the limelight, right? It is always about better outcomes for the group, as a value that drives your choices. And if you operate from those two dimensions, then you will, over a period of time, sharpen your skills and move up in terms of leadership, which is where my earlier slides were about. And the leader within you will open up. I hope that
Oh,
answers the question.
yes, sir. Yes. Sir, we have one more question here from Savita Shastri.
Okay.
She's asking, what is your take on the transformational leadership?
Yeah. So my take on transformational leadership. Okay. So transformational leadership is this, at a different level. You are not bounded by constraints that others see as constraints.
Yeah.
You operate with a different lens, have the courage to take on the challenge head on. And so there is enough research information, plus anecdotal stories that emerge. And the Chinese have got this right, because they, in their symbol and language, crisis and opportunity are seen as the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the concept of Dao, which is really, we've seen those as well, which is, there is a circle in it, there is a black part, and then there is a white part, and embedded in that black part is the white dot, and in the white space there is a black dot. And those are dynamics that are always afoot. And the transformational leadership is really looking at each challenge as an opportunity to define possibilities, and that is where the transformational leadership, and it's not easy to get to. It's a journey of relentless the ability to face up to challenges as they come, climb those, take on those battles, and eventually it becomes an intuition and a deep sense of ownership. And it varies from context to context. It's embedded in a deep ownership that this is not somebody else's problem, it is my problem, and I'm not walking away from it. That
Yes.
almost parenting of that dynamic is where the
Yeah.
transformational leadership, and the courage to not walk away, put everything on the line if required, that deep intensity we were able to bring in, that's where the transformational leadership, and then the team backs you. An example of this, that yeah, so we can go on, but we can. For example, there was an instance where in the siege of Stalingrad in World War II, when
Yeah.
lakhs of people were dying all around, there was a agronomist doing some seed research, and he was trying to build a seed bank. His team, and he had thousands of kgs of seeds lying with him, but refused to back down, and did some pioneering work with his team, which actually set up post World War II the idea of seed banks around the world. It came from massive amounts of conviction around the sense of purpose that he saw in his maqsad, and that's really where this is coming from.
Yeah. That's very well answered, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Sir, one more question we'll take. That
Yeah.
is from Dr. Harish Kumar.
Okay.
He asks, what are the traits or the few traits required by leaders in the times of COVID-19?
What are the traits required by leaders in the times of COVID-19?
According to you, sir. Yeah, according to you, what you feel?
Okay, so again, some of that which effectively what it's, actually, the Prime Minister said something very interesting in March, which hit me, which is, he said something that this disease will change epochs. Effectively, the rules by which we have lived our lives till February, March 2020 are in large sense out of the window, because suddenly, what is called for is there are increasingly going to be undercurrents such as this that will come at us in terms of volatility economically, socially, environmentally, and therefore a deep sense of the connectedness that is all life, that the human being is not the center of life. We
Yeah.
are part of the larger creation, and the courage to operate from that lens is to my mind the message that we need to imbibe as societies around the world and operate from that lens. And it really then becomes bottoms up rethinking everything that we built so far, because the resilience that we have taken for granted, because there is so much in terms of bounty from nature, is
Yes.
suddenly in question, and we need to look very long and hard and building resilience in cultures around the world, so that our choices strengthen resilience of the ecosystems, societies, individuals. There is a huge challenge globally in terms of people committing suicide. Why is that? Because there is a deep sense of isolation, loneliness, drug addiction, alcoholism. Why? Where is that coming from? A breakdown of social bonds that should be nurturing, and a sense of isolation that somebody feels. So equally, it's coming from the same challenge, and COVID is really setting that up, bottoms up, and forcing us. And it's again Darwinian, because repeatedly nature is dialoguing with us, to my mind, and by means of throwing a challenge at us, it's making human society question implicit assumptions, like the Portuguese did, abandon those, and find our way through to a new norm in the years ahead, and therefore optimistic, but it will require revisioning fundamentals.
Yes, sir. Very nicely answered, sir. Because what we personally feel also is this is the time a lot of leaders can emerge, because world needs more leaders in terms of crisis.
Yeah.
Especially in COVID-19, these things are a lot of students have come up with a lot of products which are helping hospitals, police, stores.
And here, just as a question, because I'm coming distilled essence again, something that I'm deeply inspired by the Prime Minister, so I will quote him. Somebody asked him a question, I think in Houston, and he turned around. He was speaking in Hindi. He says, "Aapko kya mila?" That I do this, etc. And the point I want to make is that the meaning making, which is embedded in exploring what values do I stand by,
Yes.
and what have I found for myself in my own persona,
Yes.
and having found that it's the gold, then
Yes.
it's something that is my foundation, that defines me,
Yes.
and that's who I want to be identified by going forward. Is this,
Yes.
if you are operating from that lens, then you will emerge automatically as leaders and take on, at whatever level of society that you operate, and any part of the world, in any group, that sense of purpose will manifest, and be experienced positively by others, and there's a crying need for it, across the board.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. आपको इसमें क्या मिलता है वो, that's what people think, right? But the purpose and the inner
Correct. That
feel
is
something
intrinsic
society.
payoffs, internal payoffs. Those are after many years of work experience. That's what at some point becomes the reason why you work becomes rewarding. Like Dr. Venkat Swami. I mean, beyond the point, how many more hospitals? Not hospitals. It's that I'm making a difference in thousands and lakhs of individuals across India and around the world. Right?
Yes, yes. This is what is happening, sir. To add up to your point, I just wanted to share something. Like we can see a lot of, we learn a lot of lessons from COVID, that it taught us that the humanity exists, and there are so many people who are there to support the poor and those who are earning the daily bread, and they went ahead to give them the ration and stuff like that. A lot of you part in the lockdown to educate people and stuff like that. Even celebrities came down and to tell the public that people have to stay at home. lot of things. I mean, a lot of leadership we have seen in these things,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
individually everybody can contribute for the betterment of the country and betterment of the society, sir. I mean, very nice lessons what we
Yeah.
really got by this session.
Great.
Yeah, sir. I mean, there are certain other questions also, but however, I mean, we are restricting the questions here, and really at this juncture, we really required. I feel that it was really required the session on leadership lessons or perspectives from history. Like we can learn really from history, like how leaders have emerged when the society or the country is bogged down by some national calamity or by some political pressure or economical crisis, whatever happens. And now India or the entire world is in such a big mess
Yeah.
where leaders can emerge and do something. And this is where I just would like to add one more thing, sir, like social entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
People can come up with new different ideas to help the society and,
Yeah. Absolutely. Somebody actually, I'm inspired by that, was the cigarette butts. He's actually set up a business around that, correcting cigarette butts and pulling out the fiber at the end of the cigarette, which is the filter, and disposing of the tobacco and all of that paper, etc. Recycling that, and it's sky's the limit as far as these things go. Some years back, recycling plastics and making roads out of that. As against dumping them, so it's endless. But so it's just journeys. Then what can I do for the groups that a society that I'm part of at multiple levels? Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
That was a very interesting and a very
my quick apology to the participants, because somewhere there were technical issues early on. I hopefully found some rhythm once the technical issues settled down about 20-30 minutes back. Sorry on that, but I don't know how
it was really
that.
So, I mean, we have been receiving the feedback. Yes, there was a technical glitch in between, but the session has been really wonderful, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. Privileged to help you all, and always a privilege to interact with an education institute.
Yes.
Okay. So take care. All the best. All the best to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listeners and people who joined. All the best to all of you. Bye bye.
Sir, let me propose a vote of thanks, and I really thank Mr. Bijal Chhaya, who is a very busy person, works for Wipro Technologies, and thanks. I really thank him for spending his valuable time with all of us, and we can see that a lot of people from all over the country have joined in, and I feel that they have benefited from his talk. He's a very, very busy person, and we are able to catch him and during the lockdown. Otherwise, if it is completely working, it's very, very, very difficult to get him. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your time and the perspective what you have shared on leadership. And let me also thank the management of Basveshwar Engineering College and BUE Sangha, especially the principal, Dr. S.S. Engineering, for supporting us in carrying out a webinar series, and also the coordinators, Dr. Lakshmi Hullur and Vaibhav Deshpande, and all our students and all technical staff who have helped us directly and indirectly to do this. And of course, all the participants who have joined today and been with us on all ups and downs. Thank you very much for being a part of this webinar and the webinar series what we are going to do. So we are going to come up with still more topics, burning topics, and useful webinars. So please be in touch with us. Okay. So thank you all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.